What's the scariest true story you've heard or told? One day as a kid I was exploring the forest near our house with my cousin. The forest was on a hill, but there were several craters there because of bombs that were dropped there during the World Wars, Germany. One day we saw a backpack at the bottom of one. We tried to climb down, but it was kinda steep and slippery, so we didn't want to risk falling. We planned on returning later with a rope, and went home. The next day news story was that there was a backpack found with the remains of a girl, in that forest. A guy walking his dog found it, after the dog wouldn't stop barking and going crazy at the edge of the crater, while staring at the backpack. We stopped exploring the forests after. 2. My mother never taught me to swim because when she was a teenager she saw a friend get sucked into a whirlpool at the bottom of a drainage lake that is the deepest body of water within a few hundred miles of us. They didn't find his body for days. 3. One of my dad's friend's wife was unalived by some crazy dude walking down the street. This guy had just been released from a mental hospital and literally just stabbed her as she walked home. When my dad's friend came back he thought she had just taken the dogs out for a walk, so he walked along the normal walk route and he saw loads of blue lights. He was stopped by a police officer and wasn't allowed any closer until he saw that it was his wife. 4. When I was young I saw a documentary about a guy who got flesh-eating bacteria in his nasal cavity. It ate his face and he's still alive. Eventually they removed the bacteria by removing the eaten parts of his face. He got a prosthetic face, which back in those days was basically a plastic Halloween mask that tried to look human. At the end of the documentary, he took the mask off. His face from his forehead down to his mouth was just a hole. 5. I met a guy who had been traveling Australia with a couple friends, hitchhiking around as many of us had done. One of his friends told him they were near his distant uncle's house, whom he'd never met before. He got a phone number from a family member and as they had hoped, the uncle offered them a place to stay. He picked them up in town and drove them out to his rural property way out in the bush. They said he seemed like a pretty normal guy, friendly and cheery. When it was time to set up a place to sleep, the uncle took them to a closet that was totally full of sleeping bags and bedrolls. They didn't think much of it at the time and all grabbed a kit and set up on the living room floor. They stayed a couple days and nothing out of the ordinary happened, and afterwards the uncle drove them to the bus station and they continued on their way. About a year later that man was arrested and charged with several counts of murder. He was the man who was picking up young hitchhiking backpackers and slaughtering them. The guy who told me this story was 100% certain he had slept in the sleeping bag of one of his victims.